Sam, thank you for your very, very interesting talk to us. I clutch my Carlton scarf here as a gesture of both affection, but also as indicative of something else that I think is quite critical about sport. You mentioned Kim Williams at the start of your talk, and the way in which our society at the moment is going through a period of stress that has to do with race, culture and many other issues, and the way sport can be a binding issue. The interesting paradox for most people seems to be that sport can be both a binding agent and a separating agent. And it has the power to be both. What seems to me to be the interesting, or the key to that, is that there is a codified set of behaviours. That is, we might have our differences, but they are bounded differences. They are bounded by commitment to the code.
Yes.
Is that what's fracturing in Australia at the moment, at the society level? That somehow the rules of the game vary according to the beholder?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I guess I'll start with our game or the AFL, where I think in some other codes in Europe, and we were chatting earlier about where sort of soccer fans that you barrack for one team, you're at one end, and you barrack for the other team, you're at the other end. In Australia, I think it's been mentioned to me, and I see it often when people from other countries come to our country and experience the AFL, and they see that there's men, women, families, whether you're a mad Carlton fan like you, John, or a Collingwood fan, you're all sit and mingling together. And I think that is the power of sport to unite. And I think there are a lot of issues going on, which Kim referred to and you mentioned. But I feel when you cross a white line out of no matter what background or experience or challenge that someone's having, when you come in and play a game and play sport, whether that's AFL or another sport, you cross that line and there are rules, and you're all bound by the same rules. Doesn't matter what sex, gender, creed, religion. You are all there playing something together. And for me, that's the power of sport, and particularly the AFL is Australia's Indigenous game, the game that was that started here, and it's our domestic code. That's why I think it's so powerful in this space, with so many different communities that are coming together in our wonderful country.
The reason I ask that is because it does seem to me that as AFL and other codes seek to extend themselves into the country, they are also still the heart of visceral feeling. So you are getting, even though you give the examples of people going back to Nicky Winmar right through to Adam Goodes, you are still getting sporting codes used as levers to foster difference. Now, they might be sort of small and isolated outbreaks, but in some ways they are a barometer to the sort of visceral feelings which are going on in the culture. And
as I said, the AFL's not immune to the issues and the broader issues, but as it's brought together in a stadium, I think. But I do see that the issues are limited. Like there are a lot of, but there's over 7 million people that come to the AFL, in any given year, and the issues that you do see are quite small. But you're right, it is a time when passions and the emotion of a game such as sport, they are at that can come out at times. But I think what we're doing, it's through the power of sport, we can talk to fans and communities and the broader community to say, let's call this out. If there is someone at a game, at a sport, no matter where that is, if someone has said something that is insensitive to a different culture, background or religion, that actually gets called out. And that's something that we promote, and we're building policies to address that.
I guess that's the reason I'm asking it, in the sense that because sport has such power, those policies which you've enunciated are significant for the entire community.
Exactly.
They're not just about the sporting codes. And there's a sense in which, whether you're a follower of sport or not, the implementation of those codes and seeing sporting codes committed to those wider social norms are critically important for all of us.
That's absolutely right. One in 25 Australians is a member of an AFL club. So that's over 1 million members across the 18 AFL clubs. That's 1 in 25 Australians. So when they're at a game and watching their team play, and if these issues arise, then that's elevated and that's got such reach, and it's reported in papers and others. So we've got a broader role to play, absolutely, in the game, and it extends beyond that, absolutely.
One particular issue over recent years, and importantly, or more importantly over the last couple of years, is the issue of domestic violence. Again, an issue that sporting clubs have some significant role to play. It's also linked to seeing the rapid rise of women in sporting codes, whether it's AFL or NRL. How do you see the linkage between these two issues from the point of view of a major sporting code?
Well, the AFL, as I said, is an inclusive game, and we don't discriminate, whatever background you're from, or gender's included in that. We've recently established the AFLW, National Women's League. Women have made an incredible contribution to our game over a long period, whether that be as administrators, volunteers, and as players. But recently we've established this National League, which has given women who play our game a pathway to the elite level. That has stimulated an unbelievable level of growth across our game, and we're finding that new women's teams that traditionally men's clubs have established have embraced the fairer sex, women into their club, and they're finding that that's broken down all sorts of barriers in a traditional men's domain, where women and men are training and sharing different facilities, and they're a part of a club to actually make it more like real life, and the beauty of that is multifold, where these clubs are actually becoming more accepting, more engaging, just balancing out the sort of testosterone that may have been there to actually have these clubs. So
yes, because a critical issue in most sports over the last century has been machismo. That is, the boy knows how to do it. And that's the thing that seems to be a critical point.
That's right, and we're saying no, whether it doesn't matter girl or boy, you can play AFL, you can play Auskick, there's a pathway, you can play in community club, you can get drafted. The AFL women's draft was just held yesterday, and we're going to have another fantastic suite of women playing our great game. So it's absolutely about equality and fairness, and women deserve the opportunity to play. But to your point around domestic violence, the AFL have got really strong partnerships with White Ribbon. The Sydney Derby, where the Swans and the Giants play, the local derby, the White Ribbon are our key partner to that event, and AFL New South Wales, ACT are also got a really strong partnership with White Ribbon, and we take that role seriously, and we've got that's really strong messaging around that right across the code.
And do you see that built into the way you're educating AFL women's and AFL men's clubs to associate together, to actively contribute to building those policies?
Absolutely, and working together with our community clubs. We haven't established at the elite level. Other codes might have set up different women's clubs to men's clubs, where actually our men's elite AFL clubs are having their women's teams, and it's the same here in Sydney with local community teams that now have women's teams.
Now, there may be an opportunity for people to ask questions from the audience, because I know there may be some real questions about the sort of arcane antecedents of AFL and how one explains the mysteries of the game to those who don't understand it all that readily. And I'm wondering if there are questions from the audience. Yes, we have one immediately.
I wonder if you could tell us the background of the sport, how it came about.
Yes, well, as I said before, the AFL is Australia's Indigenous game, and it was established in Australia over 150 years ago, and there are a number of influences on that. Tom Wills was a guy who wrote the original rules, and he had grew up in England and had went to private school in England at rugby, and he had some influences from rugby involved in his thinking. Initially, the idea was to create a game to keep the cricketers fit in summer. In winter, sorry. So cricket's played in summer, and they wanted a game in winter to keep the cricketers fit to play on a similar size field. But the other influence was our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who played a game called Marn Grook. And Marn Grook was a game that was played with a possum skin ball that was kicked around over a big field and was played over a number of days. And essentially, Wills codified the rules, and it's actually the oldest codified football game in the world, actually older than soccer. And yeah, it was established here in Melbourne initially, where the first game was played over 150 years ago. And yeah, traditionally it's been a southern state sport, where it started in Melbourne, and then more recently has expanded. But it was played here in Sydney back in the 1880s. It was actually quite strong. But research says that there was a decision taken by at Sydney Uni and a couple of the unis that were playing both rugby and AFL back in the 1880s that they could only focus on one sport. So they had a vote and they ended up choosing rugby by one vote. So the AFL sort of stayed traditional in the southern states for a while, but more recently has expanded, as I said earlier, with the establishment of the Swans, who came up to Sydney about 35 years ago, and the Giants that have been in the AFL competition for coming up 8 years now.
Other questions? One here.
Look, thanks for your excellent presentation, and really congratulations to the AFL as an organisation. Coming from the school's perspective, it's wonderful to see so many children adopt the game, male and female. How does the AFL prepare for other stakeholders, perhaps broadcasters, who have a huge influence over the fan base, particularly through the media and the positions they enjoy? When you have incidents such as Sam Newman's comments in August, where he questioned presence of Muslim Australians, making comments such as, they have no place in our society and all the rest of it. So, obviously that's not the position of the AFL, but how do you manage those sorts of challenges when those people have such a large audience, and I suppose in many ways represent the game where you have put so much time and effort into?
Yeah, it's a really good question. We, as I said earlier, we need to be a mirror on society, and I think having that diversity across administration, coaching, administration, but also in the media is really important, and we're taking steps in that regard. You can never control everything that anyone says, and I think there's been significant, based on the work that we're doing and the standards that we're setting and the broader community setting around what is acceptable and not acceptable in that space, to have a high-profile media person, if they are out of line in that regard, I think the community and the public are quick to stand up to that, and I think you'll see the ratings of programs like that are dropping off, and there's new more inclusive shows that are emerging. So I think general community and us as a code, we treat that seriously with relationships with broadcasters or anyone, and if you're not standing by our values in how you operate and behave, whether that be in the media, at a school or a local club, we've got policies and procedures, and we take that really seriously.
There was one here, Clive.
I want to focus on the name Australian rules. Many sports have an international dimension, and of course I think we sometimes see Australian rules over and against Gaelic football.
Yes.
But I'm just wondering whether the increasing multicultural nature of Australian rules becomes a passport to colonising the world with AFL.
Yeah, it's a good question. As I said before, the rules of soccer were codified after AFL, and clearly they've had a fantastic job with different world wars and other things where that game was transported across, was transported across the world. AFL's obviously focusing on expansion domestically, but in recent times we've had AFL games played in Auckland, in New Zealand. For the last 2 years now we've had a game played in Shanghai, in China, and that's been some of our last two Shanghai games were watched by more people than any other AFL game ever played, even our most recent grand finals, given the size of the country across China. So we're introducing a new product called AFL X, which is a shorter format of the game that can be played on rectangles as opposed to the big oval. So that's been one of the challenges around having oval suitable in different parts of the world. With cricketing nations, that's easier, where we play on the similar ground. But into the future, there'll be lots of opportunity to take our game internationally. But having said that, we've got nearly over sort of 200,000 people playing our game in different countries, across from South Africa to the Americas, across Asia as well. So the game is growing and is in a really healthy state internationally. But we are a domestic code, but we are taking it. There's a great Kevin Sheedy used to say, let's not be selfish. We need to share this game with everyone.
Other questions? Well, we have one here, and then we'll come back to you.
With the AFL, you guys do a lot of corporate partnerships, such as McDonald's, for example. Is there any partnerships that you're looking at in the future, and do you vet the corporates that will hold the same ethos of multiculturalism and fair play for everybody?
Yeah, the AFL have got a number of partners across different industries, and I think what's really clear is our values as we're working with different partners. Different partners have different values depending on the industry that they're in, but we're really clear that if there's a partner that's not in the it's sort of at odds with where we're at, that's something that we address. But in relation to a McDonald's, that's something that that's very managed around the impact that can have, and making sure that that's happening in the right way.
I'm just going to go back to you talking, and you were talking about young women who are coming into the sport and they're attracting young Muslim women. Why do you think? What's it about the sport that attracts young people into the sport, and particularly girls into the sport?
It's a good question. I think it's a game that there's no constraints. You can run. There's no offside where you have to be at one end and the other team are at the other end. And you can run. You can use your hands. You can use your feet. And it's been described to me as freedom, where you can actually, once you cross that line, you become free. And we've got great community clubs, really welcoming community clubs that as I said, don't discriminate based on race, religion, background, and gender. And we're finding, the product is great, where you have that fantastic experience. But when you go to a community club or a school program to be introduced to our game, that I guess kids and girls, boys keep coming back, because it is such a welcoming and inclusive environment that they experience. And now that in relation to women and girls, they've got that pathway and that elite role models of AFLW, where the AFL's invested really heavily to get that national elite competition, and that's inspired that next generation, where the last 2 years, as John said at the opening, we've grown 75% a year the last 2 years, which has really inspired that next generation, and that's what we're talking about, Alia and his impact that he's had on his community. It's a similar sort of thing. Yeah.
I guess as there is a representative of a Muslim women's football team here, you might have a comment on what's been said about the role of women and what is it about AFL that is so attractive?
For me, when we started, Leo and I thought really about identity, and you asked why Australian football in the name, and the question is why not? For a bunch of kids born and raised in this country with ancestry and links to other countries, they're often made to feel like they don't belong here. And so the thing that made sense was to use sport, because sport has been used to make political statements, as we're seeing right now with the NFL, for anyone following Nike getting behind Colin. I mean, it can make a really profound impact, and it can make statements about nation, about values. And for anyone who watched the UFC fight, well, that's exactly what that whole Khabib and Conor thing was about as well. And so I feel like we had an opportunity to really lead the conversation and lead that visibility and that representation. And Sam started with quoting Walid Ali, and you can't be what you can't see. And so while it was a heavy responsibility for two women who, you know, were trying to make a difference, we were about embodying being seen and making an impact. And for us, we've been part of a great sport that's transformed how it engages with women. And for us to be able to wave the flag and be part of that journey and continue to lead conversations and say, well, we've engaged women now, you can see us, but how do you genuinely include us? You know, and so we don't take our foot off the pedal. There's always a fight, right? There's always a cause. You just got to push for the next thing when you arrive at what it is you're seeking to arrive at.
And I just do want to say, I did touch on it earlier, but it's great that you're here, Amna, and you know you have done an incredible job in leading that. Being, you know, we talk about DEMA that's happened more recently, but you know, Amna was at the forefront of that by establishing a new club in Western Sydney with Muslim women to come and play our game, which is absolutely unheard of. And look at the difference that that's created. And we've got junior clubs popping up everywhere in, you know, Bankstown and Liverpool, and it's been incredible.
Ladies and gentlemen, on that note, I think we've just about run out of time, so it's time to say hi to those who are going to give us or sort of offer thanks for those who have put together today's event. Amna is actually going to come and make a presentation right now, so it was an appropriate segue. I just sort of left it behind for a moment.
To be my job. I should have jumped in and saved you. So this is your gift,
wow.
Sam, from the Affinity team.
Thank you.
Would you like to...
Oh, here.
Sorry. John, would you like to join us? Come on.
Great.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Oh, thank you very much. This is fantastic.
I think it makes sense for AFL, this colourful. Thank you.
Yeah.
It does. It reminds us of our campaign, our multicultural festival campaign. It looks very, very similar. We can take a lot from that. So thank you. Again, we're absolutely honoured and privileged to be here. And on behalf of the AFL, yeah, thank you for having us. And keep up the incredible work that Affinity are doing.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Before we end, we should thank Mehmet Saral from Saralcom, who has been the generous sponsor of today's program. And I'd like to invite Sam to present a small gift as a token of Affinity's appreciation to Mehmet, who is also going to give us a few words. So we've got that.
Thank you, Mehmet.
Token.
Really appreciate
there
that.
We are.
Thank you. You want to move over the... Okay, thank you.
I can tell. Yeah, thank you to Sam Graham for the keynote address, and to Clive Pearson for the introductions, and John Cleary for moderating the Q&A session. I think Tony Jones better look out for his... I've personally been involved with Affinity from its inception back in 2000, and as a co-founder of Affinity. And I was the past president and also on the board of directors at the moment. And I've seen this networking, non-for-profit organisation go from its humble beginnings, working with the grassroots of Australia, and to now where we are creating dialogue with all Australians from all walks of life. Our initial goal was to build bridges between the Muslim community, who were very isolated within Australia, with the rest of Australia. That was the primary goal initially when we started back in 2000. This would help Muslims to integrate into the Australian way of life, and that's what we wanted. An Australian Muslim identity, not a Turkish Muslim identity or a Lebanese Muslim identity, but an Australian Muslim identity that has, I think, eventuated after 18 years of this work. Obviously, this work has helped bring that on, but many other Muslim organisations have also followed suit in the way Affinity worked. Our goals have grown to build bridges between people from all walks of life now, not just Muslim Christian or Muslim Jewish, but all walks of life, religious or non-religious. My motivation, obviously, to sponsor today's event, they asked me to say, make that statement, was obviously I do like football and AFL and rugby. That's one motivation, but my real motivation is a no-brainer, but because of my involvement with the organisation from its inception, it was a no-brainer for me to be a sponsor. They also asked me to say, how do you trust that this donation that I've given is used in the right way? I think it's pretty obvious. The sponsorship money has been used for catering purposes and for everything else, video, editing, etc. So it covered everything. So without these funds, a non-for-profit organisation that generates no revenues can never conduct such events. So we need sponsors. Affinity's mission, the mission statement for Affinity is to create and sustain enduring relationships with people from diverse backgrounds. Creating relationships, yes, we've done, but to sustain them is a hard effort. You have to continue doing it, and non-stop. And thanks to Ahmed Polat, he's doing a great job in sustaining those relationships in the time that he's been here. Thus, people like myself who believe in the power of intercultural and interfaith dialogue help sponsor such activities, as if funds aren't available, then programs like this will not happen, and that would be a great pity. So thank you to Ahmed and the team for bringing this program together.